Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the People's School for Marxist-Leninist Studies. Today is February 4th, 2025, and tonight our class is going to be on Rosa Parks and the Montgomery Bus Strike. A few reminders: the People's School for Marxist-Leninist Studies is a Party of Communist USA sponsored group, but it is not affiliated, so this allows us to have a wide range of views and topics for discussions. So we're going to have three sections tonight. We're going to first talk about Rosa Parks herself and the lead up to the boycott. We're then going to go over the Montgomery Bus Boycott itself, and then have a section on the aftermath and the effects of the Montgomery Bus Boycott. And so our first section will be Rosa Parks and the lead up to the boycott.
Background on Rosa Parks' activism. The summer before the Montgomery Bus Boycott, Rosa Parks took a course on desegregation in the Highlander Oak School, which had a huge impact in her activism. After years of fighting for civil rights, Parks had become weary and worn down. The course reinvigorated and inspired her. Parks was also involved with the NAACP since 1943 and was the leader of the Montgomery NAACP Youth Council. She was inspired by her husband, Raymond Parks, who worked with communists on the Scottsboro case. And on the right there, you can see there's an article. It says Martin Luther King is at a communist training school, and the school that they're referring to is the Highlander Folk School. Rosa Parks' involvement with CPUSA. The Alabama CPUSA was one of the most influential political bodies organizing poor African Americans in the South during and after the Great Depression. They played a vital role in organizing African Americans during a period where many activists would later become leaders of the emerging civil rights movement. This included Parks and her husband. Though they were not officially members, they were trained and active in the Alabama CPUSA. Lead up to the boycott. Before the strike, there had been several cases in Montgomery of Black women resisting segregation on buses, including 15-year-old Claudette Colvin. Rosa Parks fundraised for Colvin's case and invited her to be secretary of the Montgomery NAACP's Youth Council. Rosa Parks herself had been kicked off the bus several times for being unwilling to follow the practice of some Montgomery bus drivers. On the night of December 1st, 1955, when she refused to give up her seat, the bus driver had her arrested. Late that night, when Parks decided to pursue a legal case, the Women's Political Council, WPC, sprang into action. WPC leader and Alabama State professor Joanne Robinson went to the college in the middle of the night and, with the help of a colleague and two students, ran off 35,000 leaflets reading, "Another woman has been arrested on the bus." The boycott would continue for 382 days. At the height of the boycott, the Montgomery Improvement Association was coordinating 10,000 to 15,000 rides per day.
Thank you, Comrade. And before we go for discussion, we're going to play a little clip from a Rosa Parks interview in 1995 she had on Larry King.
Can you tell us why you didn't sit in the back of the bus that day?
About the third stop from where I boarded the bus, there were some white people got on, and they took all the front seats and left one man standing. And when the driver saw this man standing up...
White man?
Yes, he was white. Mm-hmm. He didn't. The passenger didn't ask for the seat at all. They didn't say anything, but just found a place to stand. The driver noticed him standing, and that is when he told the four of us to let him have those seats, which meant that four of us would have been standing, and then this man could only occupy one seat, and then there would be 3 vacant seats.
But you weren't supposed to sit next to a white man.
That was the rule then.
So you did not get up?
No, I didn't.
Do you know why?
Yes, because
why?
I didn't think I should have to get up. I had already paid my fare, and I'm sure he didn't pay him more than I did. And I didn't think that once we take a seat, even in under the segregation conditions that we should be made to stand up in a crowded bus.
Are you bitter over it?
No, I'm not.
Why
Not at this time. Well, in fact, during our protest in Montgomery, we did have some white people who
Joined with you.
joined with us, and they suffered a great deal. And I felt that it was, in fact, Dr. Martin Luther King used to say himself that it was not a black and white issue, but it was right and wrong.
Right, absolutely. So you didn't hold it against collectively all white people?
That's true. I did not.
What then did you do with your anger?
I tried to use my anger. I tried to have as little anger as possible, but I tried to use it to help people who were suffering and many who were discouraged and did not have the courage to try to take a stand for themselves.
Do you feel, Rosa, that this movement has been a success?
It has we have made many improvements from way back there when we had legally enforced racial segregation, but we still have many challenges to face, and we have many problems to solve.
Do you have faith?
Yes, I still have faith that it is possible.
All right, and with that, we will break for our first round of discussion. If you have a question or a comment, please use the raise hand function, and we will get to you in the order that they go up.
Yeah, I just wanted to know how old she was at the time, because I remember, I think it was a previous class, there was some deal made how her case wasn't the only one, but it was unique because I think she was the youngest. There were other people who were protesting at the time. So how old was Rosa Parks at this time? Thank you.
So she was born on February 4th, 1913, and the Montgomery bus strikes were 1955. She would have been about 42. And if you're talking about the Larry King live clip, she would have been 82 at that time.
So I think what surprises me now, thinking about what I learned about this when I was in elementary school, it always just seemed like Rosa Parks just did this for individualistic reasons, that she just thought it was just, she would do it. And at least that's how it was presented to us. There was no context of like, that it was like well thought out and planned, and that she was speaking to a group, a collective. And so I think that's important because as, you know, we see people leave, they kind of aspire to more of an adventurous kind of individualistic act. But what Rosa Parks did, like this was planned not just with her, but with others. And I think that is lost when, at least in the American education system.
One of the biggest things about this is that in the public school, it is portrayed as like this spontaneous action that just happened to cause a riot, not a riot, a strike to occur, right? They never go over the fact that the NAACP spent months preparing for this case. And in fact, there were actually multiple similar events that were happening at the same time. Rosa Parks was not the youngest, but she was the one that NAACP decided was the most clear cut. That she had no criminal background. She had to have no blemishes essentially on her record. Unfortunately, at the time, because they knew that the media would immediately attack her character, right? So the NAACP even had to turn down. There was a 22-year-old who was a single mother that they had to essentially say, like, we're not going to like back her or bring her to the forefront, have her be our front person, because, you know, the media is going to attack you for being a single mother, which at the time was a lot more not accepted. But this took months and months and months of organizing and preparations and saving up, because they knew that people were going to have to, you know, find alternative means of transportation. So that's something I always try and stress in my classes whenever we cover the civil rights, that the civil rights did not happen because, you know, someone just woke up one day and, you know, they had an epiphany that like, hey, racism is bad. They did it because there was groups of people were organized and fought for years and years and years to get even just the smallest of bit of progress. Same thing with the Civil War. It didn't just spontaneously occur that like, hey, slavery is bad. It took years and years and years, decades of organizing and work for multiple generations. Thank you very much. That's all.
Thank you. Secretary Emeritus Angelo, you have the floor.
What I find most interesting is how society has hidden from us the communist connection in all these things. We taught the CIO was born. Very rarely were we taught who was behind it all. Who was a communist? We taught the Scottsboro case. We taught Montgomery Boycott. Nowhere was mentioned the communist connection there. That should make us start thinking. The famous case of a blind woman, what was her name? Blind, she couldn't talk, Helen Keller. Nobody knows she was a socialist, active socialist. No one knows that Einstein was pro-Soviet and was a socialist. Nobody's taught any of that. Madame Curie, who was involved with rape at the beginning of a woman scientist and from France, was a communist. Picasso, his whole thing was his art. When it first came out, abstraction art, no one really put a spotlight on his political views. And I just find that extremely strange, that we should be standing up, taking credit for all these things. And whether it's labor, women's rights, etc. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Angelo.
What Angelo's saying is 100% right. It's what our ruling class is doing is it's sandboxing what the movement really was. It's putting it in a very specific, very narrow kind of connotation. It's in everything, in every small detail. You wonder why every single photo of, like the vast majority of photos that were shown in school of Martin Luther King Jr. are in black and white, even though color was available at that time, color TV and color photos. It's so that the movement looks so much farther away than when it really was from our current time. Also the fact that Martin Luther King Jr. was also a socialist and also explicitly stated how in order for there to be social justice in this country, there would also have to be a deep economic reform, economic justice. And his interpretation was, of course, socialism. That's all.
Thank you, Comrade. If there are no more hands, we'll go on to our next section now. All right. Second part is on the Montgomery Bus Boycott.
Thank you. From Benjamin Davis on the March. The vanguard of the Negro people's upsurge in the South is the bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama. At the same time, various phases of this upsurge are to be noted in Mississippi, South Carolina, Florida, Georgia, and other states. The bus boycott in Montgomery is a unique phenomenon in modern U.S. history. It began on December 5th, 1955, and is still going strong 9 months later. It has already spread to Tallahassee, Florida. They are initiated largely by Negro students, both Negro and white in the South playing a unique role. Montgomery was the capital of the Confederacy. Its monuments and landmarks still stand as courtly inspiration to the heirs of the slave owners who would perpetuate in the modern South the feudal relics of the past. But Montgomery is an important industrial center, and a fresh breeze is blowing through the magnolia trees in Montgomery. Not alone from the Negro people, but from a growing section of the whites. In this setting, the Negro people are demonstrating magnificent heroism and courage, fully in keeping with the finest traditions of the Negro, of labor, and of the American people. More than 42,000 Negroes refuse to ride the city buses every day. Some of them walk as much as 14 miles a day, through rain, mud, and at severe risk to their health and safety. Over 99 of their leaders and rank and filers have been indicted and arrested. Their homes have been bombed, intimidation and terror have been used against them, but they stand firm and walk hard. The historic mass struggle began spontaneously from below, with the Negro workers, domestic servants, and Negro women playing a major role. It was precipitated by the arrest and conviction and manhandling of Miss Rosa Parks, a Negro seamstress who refused to move to the rear of a bus. Explained Miss Parks on why she refused to move. It was a quote, "It was a matter of dignity. I could not have faced myself and my people if I had moved," end quote. The first three most important original demands of the struggle were: first come, first served from rear to front, an end to brutalities against Negro passengers, and the hiring of Negro bus drivers, covering Negro communities. These modest demands were refused even though they did not challenge the basic evil of segregation. Their elementary, non-political character undoubtedly reflected the problems of keeping united the whole Negro community in struggle, a skillful tactic born of trade union experience. But in the course of the struggle, it has been transformed to a higher level. Its unity has grown and it has received strength nationally and internationally. The Alabama District Federal Court recently declared bus segregation illegal, basing itself upon the Supreme Court school decision. Now the boycotters have declared they will never return to segregated buses. The Alabama state officials have filed an appeal against the decision, and the maximum public pressure on a nationwide scale should come to the support of the Alabama District Court decision. The most outstanding new tactic of the boycott is its nonviolent resistance, a variation of the Gandhian nonviolent passive resistance. This is a fully militant device. It is practical since the Negro people are not only outnumbered, but are without weapons to wage a shooting battle, even if they wish to. This form of struggle shows that they do not wish to. Further, the tactic exposes the true advocates and practitioners of force and violence, namely the state and local regimes, the White Citizens Council, and the Klan lynchers. It emphasizes the peaceful democratic character of the struggle, placing the responsibility for lawlessness and disorder on the white supremacists. It draws to the Negro people of Montgomery the tremendous moral power and force of American public and religious opinion. Moreover, the eyes of the world are sympathetically on this nonviolent struggle. The nonviolent form of the struggle reflected the fact that it is based heavily on the church, drawing deeply upon the fighting as well as peace-loving tradition of the Negro Church and the Negro ministry. The all-class unity of the struggle was again demonstrated in the application of a group of Negro community figures to charter their own bus line. This too was refused by the city fathers. Although the struggle here in other parts of the South is led by middle-class and petite bourgeois leaders and intellectuals, in Montgomery, it is the Negro workers, men and women, who are the solid backbone of the boycott. The boycott is both a protest and an aggressive struggle under the leadership of middle-class and reformist personnel, but heavily reflecting working-class policies. The use of mass economic power to achieve democratic and peaceful objectives is characteristic of labor. Here, the Negro people of Montgomery are using economic power to secure their constitutional rights, to uphold law and order, to seek enforcement of the law of the land against the lawlessness of segregation, injustice, and indignity. A new and significant factor in the upsurge of the Southern Negro is that his leadership is coming out of and is native to the South itself. This is true not only of the boycott struggle in Montgomery, but it is equally true of Mississippi, with its State Council of Negro Leaders, of South Carolina with its Counter-Economic Squeeze organization, of Florida with its Civic League conducting the Tallahassee bus boycott, of Georgia and other southern states. Up until a few short years ago, the Negro movement in the South was receiving its leadership almost entirely from the North, from the Negro proletariat in the northern and western urban centers. While the Negro and allies in the North play a big role in the Southern struggles, an ever-increasing shift is being made towards the centering of this leadership in the South. World War I marked a new Negro in the North. World War II has brought forward a new Negro in the South. This, it is hoped, will encourage no underestimation of the profound role to be played in the struggle by the Negro proletariat and its allies in the northern, Midwestern, and far west cities. The South has never been solid. It has given the appearance of being so because of the peace of the graveyard, imposed by force and violence upon the Negro people. Today, the biggest testimonial to the fact that the South is not solid is the historic upsurge of the Negro people, who are in the first place native Southerners. At the same time, the large percentage of white Southerners who are on record for school desegregation, who have elected Negroes to public office, as in Atlanta in 1953, indicate a further unfreezing of the solid South and the fertile potentialities for fruitful mass work among the Southern white workers and citizenry. An important aspect of the nonviolent character of the Montgomery bus boycott is its positive influence upon the white masses. There has been a small but growing support among religious, liberal, and other sections of the white population for the struggle, due in no small part to the limited unionization in the South, but also to other factors. Undoubtedly, peaceful, non-resistant methods have influenced the strong stand taken by the white Protestant and Catholic churches in the South. The bulk of white masses are neither aggressively hostile nor active supporters. Insufficient data is available on this aspect of the situation. But the very fact that such a sharp struggle can develop in the former capital of the Confederacy without receiving active white mass hostility indicates changes in the thinking of the white masses. Even the mass lynch rally addressed by Eastland and Montgomery this year, under the auspices of the White Citizens Council, did not result in the so-called quote-unquote race riot, and violence deliberately incited by this white supremacist. Worldwide democratic currents affect Southern whites as well as Southern Negroes.
Thank you, Comrade Shea. We'll now view a short clip of Martin Luther King Jr. on launching the Montgomery Bus Boycott.
It has been moved and seconded that the resolution as read will be received and adopted. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, let it be known by standing on your feet. Started a bus protest which literally electrified the nation. And that was the day when we decided that we were not going to take segregated buses any longer. And you know, when we planned the bus boycott, we said if we could just get about 50 or 60% of the Negroes of Montgomery not to ride buses, this would be an effective boycott. I think that whole day we found 8 Negroes on the buses. And from that day on, that boycott was more than 99 and 9/10% effective. I remember that Monday morning when I was subpoenaed to be in court, the chief defendant. Many things ran through my mind. And I started thinking about the people. All day long trying to think of something to say to the people. Finally, I started to talk. The words were tumbling a bit. Let us fight passionately and unrelentingly for the cause of justice and freedom. Let's be sure that our hands are clean in the struggle. Let us never fight with falsehood and violence and hate and malice, but always fight with love, so that when the day comes that the walls of segregation have completely crumbled in Montgomery, we will be able to live with people as their brothers and sisters.
Okay. We will now break for our next discussion round.
I just wanted to emphasize on some previous points. Yes, the socialist influence, even if like, some revisionists want to, interpret it as a spontaneous event, there's still that sense of vanguard, like there are influential, people who actually care, and they are introducing information to these people. And another thing too, utilizing liberal democracy against their white suppressors. They, through nonviolence, exposed the actual shrewd nature of some of the people that were living in the country. They used democracy as a tool in achieving their method.
Good evening, everybody. I was just thinking about the depth of local organizing that pulling off actions like these took. That the leaders of these organizations were so ingrained in their local communities, and these demands sprung out of local communities as well. This isn't something that people popped up saying this is a problem. Everybody agreed that this was a problem already, and that's why people were so willing to mobilize. Thinking about how hard it is to get people to show up to a march or an action or a protest, and then in the footage you saw churches packed with people. All sorts of people joining in on these protests. That was very striking for me. And a question that arose in my mind is, how do we get there as an organization and as organizers? How do we find that deep community involvement to get people to show up? And what are we going to ask them to show up to? And I'm sure there are some concrete answers to that. And then also, I know I'm running out of time, how nonviolence was an important strategy and a tool because they were organizing in the South through the churches for the most part because there wasn't strong union membership in that region. So now that we live in an era where there's neither strong church membership nor strong union membership, what strategies and in what places should we organize?
Yeah, when it comes to our strategy, I know I'm still a big believer of Henry Winston's strategy for a Black agenda, where he's talking about organizing through the mass organizations. We saw there MLK. He was he was part of I think it was a pastor or a priest, or yeah, pastor. And so he was part of the religious community. And as communists, we don't really like to say that we're religious, but we definitely have to be organizing in the churches, the synagogues, the temples, the mosques, as well as other forms, like with all of our other different mass organizations. And that is really the strategy, is organizing on those lines, getting the people, because, not everyone wants to see a hammer and sickle or wants to read Lenin, but they are interested in certain particular issues. And I mean, I would just suggest read Henry Winston's book because he brings up MLK in it. That's all.
60 seconds. Thank you, comrade.
Nah, it's interesting what comrade was talking about, and I don't know, I see a lot of people today being like, down with the empire, or America's always been fascist, and the quicker it collapses, the better. But when you look at history, you've seen that in labor or in civil rights, it's been America has hundreds of years of people suffering for their civil rights and suffering for the liberties we have today. And of course, a lot of these things aren't going to be the tool to lead us to socialism, but we can use the things that we have fought for and the things we have won and use them to our advantage. Like, use the democracy, the limited democracy we do have, but use it to our advantage. And it's easy to go, and I guess there's always been people that are mad about their situation or their conditions. Like, it's easy to go like Luigi Mangione and kill a CEO, but that's not going to do anything, and that might send the movement back, or it might be negative for the movement. But we need to be agitating in an efficient way, and we need to be attacking these things in a way where we can do this over time, and we're not just going to fizzle out after a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of ask about something said when he was talking about strategy for a black agenda. My question was more like, is New Outlook publishing that at all?
Yes, so New Outlook Publishers is publishing it. I would look up the selected works of Henry Winston, volume 1 and 2.
All right.
We also have a forthcoming volume 3 as well of his works.
Yeah, through some of the discussion today, it reminded me of something I'd seen recently, unrelated, but it was the Sakai movement, which is the settlers thing, and it had said basically, what are you fighting for? And it showed a map of all the states. It said, these are the reservations in your states. This is what you should be fighting for. And actually, this thing went further. It said, this is what Marxist-Leninists are fighting for. And it would have gone back like with the black belt thing at the time. Really, the mass movement work is real communist work. And at this time, we saw the result of it. There was desegregation. It's well known that before the marches, I forget the name of this group, somebody could tell me. It's not the Black Panthers, but there's this other group of African Americans who would like go and break windshield or break like windows and stuff like before the marches, just kind of like provocateurs, if you will. But the real communist work is this work.
60 seconds.
Stuff with Rosa Parks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, just wanted to give a great book recommendation. If you want a case study on South organizing by the CP back in the 1930s, Hammer and Hoe, I'll hold it up there. This is an absolutely amazing book. I recommend that every single activist needs to be able to read this. Because if you think that today, it's hard to go out and organize for myself, they would send an 18-year-old from the North and they send him to deep state Alabama by himself and then tell him, hey, go build the movement there now. That's your job, right? And they would work. They would succeed. They're that disciplined and they understood the people there, right? So we need to be as connected to the people as these people now are, right? Whereas today, I was thinking about it the other day where we couldn't even organize people to boycott Coca-Cola, let alone a critical means of transportation in our lives, right? So this is something that organizing and talking to the people and getting them to understand why they need to be, in agreement with us is something that is desperately needed. It's a skill that desperately needs to be trained on and worked on. And it's like any other muscle, right? It's only going to get better if you try and you suck at it at first and someone tells you to go, F yourself, and then you get a little better and then maybe they stop telling you to F yourself and then eventually maybe you can convince one person to your side. But the moment that first time that you do, it's a great feeling. I recommend everyone try it. Better than any drug.
Thank you. All right. If there's no other hands, we'll go on to our next section.
Benjamin Davis on the boycott. The Negro people in the South, as well as throughout the country, have a growing consciousness of their strength and of the power of unity and organization. They are determined to use this strength and concert with their allies to achieve their full economic, social, and political equality now, and not on the basis of quote-unquote gradualism and moderation in some vague and distant future. The Negro people are conscious in the necessity to struggle, historically aware of the gap between the law and the actual exercise of their full citizenship rights. They are relying more than ever on their own struggles to help transform their legal rights into reality. Even after a federal court in Montgomery outlawed segregation on the bus boycott is continuing and spreading to other states. Since the bus boycott is a successful variation of nonviolent resistance when used under given circumstances, such as those existing in Montgomery and other urban centers in the South. A. It reflects the fact that half of the 10 million Negroes in the South have migrated to the southern urban centers and are now able to use their mass economic power as a weapon. The national question in the South can no longer be considered a purely peasant question. B. Within the framework of the North-South and Negro wage differentials, the Negro workers in urban communities have benefited in a limited manner from the expansion and militarization of the economy and are now able to wage stronger battles for their rights. Negroes in Montgomery are contributing some $300 a day for a carpool, with middle-class professionals sharing the expense, lending cars, money, and etc. Exercise of the right to vote is the central common demand among the Negroes against the Jim Crow system. In urban centers, in particular, Negro workers are paying the poll tax and financing huge registration and vote campaigns. Before certain limited economic improvements took place, they could not pay the poll tax. The right of the Negro people to vote would change the whole relationship of forces in the South and in the nation. Negroes in the South consider their movement for liberation as a part of the worldwide struggle of the colonial people for independence, dignity, and self-government. But in the form of their struggle under American conditions is an integration. Our work and attitude toward the South over the last decade has been heavily marked by left sectarianism and other mistakes, and by a shocking failure to keep up with the developments in that region. We have lagged badly in applying our Marxist-Leninist science to the changes in the South. But as to the status of our organization in the South, let us not forget the almost terrifying conditions under which our members have had to work there, and the brutal conditions of illegality which the Southern Bourbon class has imposed upon the party over a number of years. Undoubtedly, it is on the agenda that new forms of organization be considered for the South. We should approach this question in as creative a manner as the outlawed sections of the NAACP, which are flexibly adopting new forms of organization as a result of the outlawing of their organization in Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, and other states. The NAACP and other Negro and labor organizations are getting a taste of the bitter persecution which our party has suffered in the South for more than 25 years. But the beginning point for our party is to radically overcome its gross and entrenched neglect of the South with respect to attention, above all, forces and policy. This is the prerequisite to our contributions to the new and historic opportunities and relationship for the progressive development in the South. Certainly, we should not idealize the bus boycott nor the other struggles in the South. These movements face serious problems and dangers to be solved and avoided. These are questions of perspectives, winning the white workers and the masses, raising the demands of the sharecroppers and poor farmers, tactical and basic economic questions. These contributions of Marxists are badly needed and occasionally in demand, but first we have to present it in the flesh. We must commend such militant young leaders in the South, such as Hunter O. Doe, who virtually bearded Eastland, Louisiana, and all our Negro and white Southern comrades who have worked heroically in the most trying circumstances. Many of these are now in the North, where our political relations with them are vital. This is not to mention the contributions of Jackson, Scales, Strong, and others, and especially those who are still on the firing line in the South today. Our party has to eliminate all approaches of routinism on the South and recapture, for the new conditions of this period, its famous crusading spirit.
All right.
For more than 11 months, we, the Negro citizens of Montgomery,
have been engaged in a non-violent protest against indignities and injustices experienced on city buses. We have felt all along that we have just cause and legal excuse for such action. We simply decided to say en masse that we were tired of being trampled over with the iron feet of oppression. All along, we have sought to carry out the protest on high moral standards. Our methods and techniques have been rooted in the deep soils of the Christian faith. We have carefully avoided bitterness and have sought to make love, even for our opposers, a reality in our lives. These 11 months have not at all been easy. Often we have had to stand amid the surging murmur of life's restless sea. Many days and nights have been filled with jostling winds of adversity. Our feet have often been tired, and our automobiles worn. But we have kept going with the faith that in our struggle we have cosmic companionship, that at bottom the universe is on the side of justice. Just yesterday we experienced a revelation of the eternal validity of this faith. It was on this day that the Supreme Court of this nation affirmed that segregation is unconstitutional in public transportation. This decision was simply a reaffirmation of the principle that separate facilities are inherently unequal, and that the old blessed doctrine of separate but equal is no longer valid, either sociologically or legally. This decision came to all of us as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of enforced segregation in public transportation. Now, what will be our mode of action in the light of this decision? After thinking through this question very seriously, and I might say properly, the Executive Board of the Montgomery Improvement Association recommends that the 11-month-old protest against the city buses will be called off, that the Negro citizens of Montgomery, Alabama will return to the buses on a non-segregated basis. Now this is important. Let us hear the next part. It is further recommended that this return to the buses will not take place until the mandate from the United States Supreme Court is turned over to the Federal District Court. It is true that this is purely a procedural matter, but it is a matter that might be used by reactionary elements to plunge us into needless harassment and meaningless litigation. We have the assurance from authentic sources that this mandate will come to Montgomery in a matter of just a few days. For those 3 or 4 days, we will continue to walk and share rides with friends. All of us have the basic responsibility to seek to implement this noble decision. let all of us be calm and reasonable. With understanding, goodwill, and Christian love, we can integrate the buses with no difficulty. This is Montgomery's sublime opportunity. We can now transform our jangling discourse into meaningful symphonies of spiritual harmony. This is the statement. Now, let us prepare to vote on what we have here. This recommendation has two parts. Number one, that as a result of the Supreme Court's decision upholding the decision of the Federal District Court, that is the decision outlawing segregation in public transportation, we will call off the protest and return to the buses on a non-segregated basis. That's the first part. The second part is that we will hold off returning to the buses for a few days until the order or the mandate reaches Montgomery from the United States Supreme Court. Now we stress the importance of this because there might be some difficulties developing by reactionary elements saying that you are not in your legal rights. We don't know whether this law is in effect or not. We don't mind getting arrested. It isn't that. It isn't that we are afraid to go back right today or tomorrow. It isn't that we are afraid of getting arrested, for we are used to going to jail now.
All right, and with that, we will break for our final discussion round.
Yeah, I think, one thing that I think we need to learn from this, especially given today, is, a lot of those on the left and even self-proclaimed communists act like liberals are our major enemies, our biggest threats. But right now, we're seeing that every turn, there were always liberals that helped in the struggle. It was when the struggle, became successful that then you had reactionary elements come in and either assassinate or depose. Like, for instance, with Abraham Lincoln, after the freeing of the slaves, he was assassinated, and they put in Andrew Johnson, who then ended or stopped the Reconstruction period. After Roosevelt died, Henry Wallace, who was the vice president, was kicked off to the side, and they brought in the conservative Harry Truman, who, really rolled back a lot of the progress Roosevelt had done. What I'm trying to say is, like, as we go into these, next few years, right now the liberal people are waking up. They're seeing how bad things are getting. We need to be able to work with them against the reactionary elements. As Angelo said, we are not so different from liberals. The difference with us is that where they prescribe a Band-Aid, we prescribe a surgery. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, comrade.
Yeah, really well said by comrade. Martin Luther King kind of explained what I was saying earlier. If you heard what he said, wait for the Supreme Court decision. Why? Because the states weren't going to accept that decision. And that's important because the ultra-left people, they just say, out with the government. But we fight these fights with certain things. Yeah, the unions aren't perfect. Our legal system is definitely not perfect. But we fight this fight with those measures and others. And this is the thing which is relevant today, as Tyler was talking about. One thing that I know I've seen is that Trump is talking about returning the states' rights. So it's like going back a century or two. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't handle myself just watching that because I just think about what's happening today under Trump, and it actually brings tears to my eyes to think that we are going so far back after what we accomplished in the civil rights, what the communists, what Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, what they all accomplished, and now we have a president that's blaming airplane crashes on DEI hires, and think how like disrespectful that is, given that there were people there, people of color that were on that crash. If you were part of that family, and the president says, "Oh, it's DEI hires," that it's pathetic and it's really sad. We really have a lot to do, especially on this issue. But I think this is a wake-up call. Like I know we can all relate to this in their daily lives, but that's all. I don't really have a question or anything.
Thank you.
The movement of MLK, at the end of the day, is more about building intellectual capital. Where you lack in economic and physical being and necessities, you replace with intellectual being and sharing it with other people. Some people, when in relation to this knowledge, of course, they would like break windows and they would do certain things. But at the end of the day, they were still building an intellectual base for movement, and as well as deconstructing government for the masses, for people to understand that what is going on. And really, at the end of the day, too, with Rosa Parks, it's really bridging the ethical level, because simply refusing to get up and move on the bus is different in equivalence to breaking a window or burning down a house. And a lot of people will be all like, oh, well, this person did this, well, this person did that. At the end of the day, where can we go without knowledge and building up the intellectual capital that people can agree on, and introducing it to people who with differing wages and economic abilities are able to understand? It's about breaking it down to them. And it worked to a certain extent with equality. Now it's more about equity. But that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Kimberly.
Let me give you an anecdote. There was another interview with Rosa Parks, and she gave some background, which I thought was very interesting, because we have to realize that we can't, tar everybody with the same brush. She had been riding the buses for a long time, and there was one bully. She even knows his name. I forgot who it was, but it was a bus driver that loved being mean to the blacks. And he would force them to pay their fee in the front, leave the bus, and go to the back entrance. And sometimes he didn't open the doors, he just drove away. So, over the years, she learned to avoid this particular bus driver. Except that day, she really did say she didn't realize she was getting on his bus. All right? So she gets on the bus, and when you talk about routine, when the blacks had their seats, the whites had their seats, the whites stood up. They didn't go over and say, "Pardon me, I want your seat." You have to understand that. The whites stood up. It was the bus driver that went back and demanded that she give up a seat to a white man who didn't ask for it. It was the bus driver. And because of his bullying. That's why he had her arrested. He went too far. And she just found that that was very interesting and actually was the best incident that they could have. I just thought you'd be interested in that. It's because, they're like both Ben Davis and MLK have said, it's black and white, unite and fight. Just want everyone to remember that.
Thank you, comrade.
Hey, so big question. I'll try to keep it concise. But I've heard from different people that like the 60s and the civil rights movement can be described as a third American Revolution. Revolutionary War being the first one, Civil War being the second one. I would first off want to know if we agree or disagree with that sentiment. The obvious difference is it did not escalate into such an armed conflict as the other previous two American revolutions. And then, but to take it a step farther, is a big reason why the 60s did not have a deeper political change, I think we would say, is because be around in the 60s. Would we agree that that's the reason why the 60s didn't have as much revolutionary change as as other parts of American history? Let's whatever we got, I appreciate. Thank you.
Comrade Angelo, go ahead.
I lived and participated in the movement of the 60s. Let me explain something. The New Left, which is what developed in the 60s, happened because the old left, that was basically the Communist Party, was underground. So because we were underground, we cannot reach and continue what we learned to the new generation. They came upon social change without the help of the party. And I think that's why they failed so miserably. We did fail, but we succeeded in one thing. We brought new people into this revolutionary movement. Now, our job was to educate them correctly in how to organize, and we weren't able to do that. We weren't, because there was no Communist Party showing what they did in the period of the CIO, when they built the unions. There was no communist around to tell us what they did in the 20s and in the 30s when they built the unemployed councils, mass movements. So we didn't have that around to help us. We had to start from scratch, and we made the same mistakes that the early people in the left did. And then it's basically we relied on something called spontaneity. That's what we relied upon, not organization. That's my feeling of that period that I went through. I was one of the lucky ones. I really was. I came into the New Left already a communist, already a lover of the Soviet Union, 13, and a supporter of the Communist Party. So that's the case of millions of others. They didn't have that opportunity.
Thank you, Comrade Angelo. General Secretary Joe, you haven't spoken tonight. You have the floor.
Yeah, as to the question of whether the civil rights movement was a third revolution, I think we need to think about what the Marxist-Leninist view of revolution would be. And I would say that would be a fundamental shift in the relation of power between classes. So the first American Revolution, 1776, was a bourgeois revolution, overthrowing, basically the monarchy control. And the Civil War, you could say, is the second American Revolution in that it completed the bourgeois revolution in the United States, because prior to that, there was still chattel slavery. And it was really the victory of industrial capital over that was the Civil War. as far as the civil rights movement, I don't know if there was really a shift in the balance of class power in that sense. So I don't think we would consider that a third revolution as I see it.
Thank you, Comrade Joe. National Secretary?
Yeah, and hopefully Angelo responds. I was listening to Angelo's response because basically I wasn't going to ask more questions, but I was going to answer a question with the question. He answered, could the events in the 60s and 70s be considered a revolution? And I would answer that question with the question, where are those people now? Where is that movement now? What did it do? So we know Martin Luther King, that was definitely maybe not an actual political, government revolution, but desegregating the country. As we just mentioned earlier, even though the slaves were freed, Lincoln was assassinated, and then other people were put in power who basically kept the country segregated. So that was a positive step. And we know that Martin Luther King was assassinated when he started talking union and connecting it to the working class. So I hope Angelo could speak again, perhaps, on this subject. But that was my answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade. And we'll close out with the Internationale.
We want no condescending saviors to rule us from a judgment hall. We workers ask not for their favors, they're just consumpts for all. To make the fleetless scorches booty, to free the spirit from your cell. We must ourselves decide our duty, we must decide and do.